All right, looks like we're good to go. Yay! So we're going to try this one more time. So, hello everyone. My name is Mattias. I'm the CEO of USAGAIN. We collect used clothes and shoes across the United States using clothing drop spots and regular collection bins. So today I'll be speaking about reuse and recycling and the future of the secondhand clothing industry. Among other things, I will be speaking about the environmental impact of textiles. And now, if this whole situation, you being at the Garson & Shaw event, me standing up here talking about the environmental impact of textiles seems even vaguely familiar to you, that's because you've been to a lot of Garson & Shaw events. Maybe you attended in 2010, in 2011, 2017, 2023, and now you're thinking, am I stuck in some kind of environmental impact time loop? And the truth is, I don't know if you are, but I know you're not Bill Murray and I'm not the groundhog, so I think we're okay. So I will be talking about the environmental impact of clothing today, but we will be reviewing some new information from a very recent study, and we will be talking about how we can protect our industry against the threats of big brands closing the loop by eliminating the second-hand clothing industry. I've enjoyed coming to the Garson & Shaw, the world of second-hand clothing events for many years. And I must say that it is a great pleasure to see so many new and also so many more faces at this event. I think we should let Lisa and her team know how much we appreciate them bringing us all together here again. So this first part of my presentation is for us to get to know each other a little bit. In addition to all the new faces, I also see a lot of familiar ones, and that is always nice. And I don't know what it is about secondhand, but just like me, you have not aged one bit. So you may have noticed that I touched my left ear as I made that last statement. That was a visual cue for you to know that I was joking. I've been told that I joke around a lot and that it's sometimes difficult to tell when I'm being serious and when I'm not. So if at any time during this presentation you see me touching my left ear, please don't believe a word I'm saying. Okay? Okay? Okay, good. All right, let's try this out. Climate change is a hoax. The vaccines will kill you. Fast fashion is harmless to people and planet. The billionaires will save us all. So we're still in the part of my presentation where we're getting to know each other a little bit, and I feel like at least you're getting to know me a little bit by now. But if we're going to talk about the future of our industry, I think it's kind of important that we all get to know each other a little bit. So before we go any further, I want to let you know that this presentation is going to be interactive. So you're not going to be able to just sit back and relax, but you will be required to participate. So please take out your phone. I see there are some early adopters here. Always nice to see. Scan this QR code, and then there will be a link. You click the link. Now we're learning how to use QR codes. And then you're going to say no to the cookies, because some of us are going to the beach this weekend. And then you should be ready for your first poll. So we already saw that we were representing a lot of different countries. Lisa said 25 different countries. So this first poll is maybe not going to give us any new information, but it's a test to see if you know where in the world you live. And it's a pro tip here. If you turn the phone this way, the map gets a little bit bigger. But don't worry about hitting your home address exact, because we're not going to use this information to track you down later or anything. So please tap on the map. Where is it showing? Oh, it's waiting for me. Okay, maybe we're not doing a poll. This worked great in rehearsal, by the way. I wish you had all been there. All right. So what we're going to do then for our next question is, I'd like to see how long you've been, forget about the app, okay? It's technology. Yeah. So I'd like to see how long you've been in this industry. So let's start with the newbies. If you've been in the industry for less than a year, can you stand up? Oh, we have a few newcomers. All right, very nice. Then we have the I'm getting a hang of it crowd. You've been in the industry for 1 to 5 years. Okay, a little more people. All right, third category, we have I'm putting my mark on it. So you've been in the industry for 5 to 20 years. Okay, that's more like it. It's nice. It's a seasoned crowd. And then we have the original gangsters. So you've been in the industry for 20 plus years. All right. Look at that. All right. Next poll. It's great we can do this just by standing up. So next poll, we're going to see what different parts of the industry are represented here. So could everyone who is working in collection stand up? And if you or your company does collection, okay, maybe you don't physically collect the clothes, but all right, quite a few, okay. Next one is brokering. Brokering, do you do brokering? Yeah, we got some. Then we have freight. Do we have any freight forwarders maybe? Yeah, oh yeah. These people are the key to our success. Then we have wholesale. Any wholesalers here? Oh, yeah. A lot of wholesalers. Very nice. Any sorting operations? Oh, wow. Look at that. Retail. Oh. Retail is well represented. Any recyclers? Recyclers. There are a few recyclers, but not so many. All right, thank you for that. So we can see that we have a very nice cross-section of our industry represented at this event. Okay, so now let's get into the meat of it. It all starts with the purchase of a garment, right? A new piece of clothing. And the thing is that most of us don't just buy one piece of clothing, right? And that's why the fashion industry is a $2 trillion industry. So one way to understand a number like this is by comparing it to the largest countries in the world. So if you were to rank fashion along with national economies, fashion is the 7th largest country in the world. And you have to sell a lot of pieces to make that kind of money. So I've seen numbers of between 100 and 150 billion pieces being produced every year, or being sold, I should say, sold every year. That means that humanity is currently buying between 13 and 15 pieces of clothing per person per year. But since many, if not most, of the people today on our planet are not buying any new clothing, that means that some are buying a lot more than 15 items a year, right? So let's look at how consumers behave in a few different countries. So this little bar chart is showing the number of items purchased per consumer in a selection of countries. And as you can see, the US is, like shopping, right? So that's about one item per week, one new item per week. And then if you look at countries like Egypt and Vietnam, that's 2 items per person per year, 2 new items per person per year. But it's also interesting to compare, because of course we know that the US is a much richer country than Vietnam, right? People have more income. But the UK is very comparable to the US, but you can see the UK consumer buys significantly fewer items, and so does the Japanese consumer. So now let's look at what the average spending per apparel item is. And here you can see that the US consumer may be buying a lot of items, but it's a thrifty buyer compared to the UK, Japan, and then Norway tops this list. This is just a selection of countries with the highest spend per item. And I don't know if you've seen one of these Norwegian wool sweaters, beautiful, sturdy sweaters, and they will last you a lifetime, but they're expensive pieces of clothing. So you can buy one of these sweaters, you wear it for 10 years, you pass it on, somebody else wears it for 10 years, somebody else wears it for 10 years. Buying a garment like that, that's really beneficial to reducing the environmental impact of our clothing, right? Because if we can get a lot of use out of a piece, that reduces the harm that it does per use. And then, So designing for durability is the key to increasing reducing the environmental impact. Okay, now let's get into the reuse and recycling. So we need to talk about what the definitions of these two concepts are. So I'm going to give you three possible, let's see if this will work. No, it doesn't work. But I will tell you. So here are three possible definitions of the term recycling. Number one, giving clothes a new life by letting somebody else wear them. That's number one. Number two, breaking down used items to make raw materials for the manufacture of new products. That's number two. Number three, shipping stuff to China and let them figure out what to do with it. That's number three. Okay, so who thinks that number one is the right definition of recycling? Anyone? Anyone? No? Okay. Who thinks number two is the right definition of recycling? There are a few, yeah. Okay. Who thinks number three is the right definition? Okay, the safest thing is, of course, not to answer at all. Yeah. Okay, you figured that out. But the majority of the people who did answer, they said number two, and that is, of course, correct. So recycling is when we take something and we break it down and we use it as raw material to create a new product, as opposed to reuse, which is actually using the item as it is with minimal manipulation, which is the preferred way to handle the material for the environment. Okay, so now that we have the definitions straight, let's compare the environmental impact of reuse to the impact of recycling. And in order to do that, we have to look at the life cycle of a garment. So here we have a t-shirt, and it has 5 phases in its life cycle. And then we examine the environmental impact in each phase. So the first phase is the material phase. And here we're interested in, is this a man-made synthetic material, or is it, for example, cotton or wool? Was the cotton grown organically? Is the raw material virgin, or was it recycled? All this will impact the environmental footprint of the t-shirt. Then we have the production phase. And here, the energy source that is used makes a big difference. So was it renewable energy, or was it fossil fuels? Then we have the transport phase. Here, the distance that the garment has to travel and the mode of transportation makes a big difference. And in the use phase, that's where the consumer can decide to wear the garment once or 50 times. And that will make an enormous difference on the environmental impact of the garment. And then finally, the disposal phase, where the garment is going to be recycled, or it's going to be landfilled or incinerated. So we're going to review some data from a study that was commissioned by Zurich Textiles in Europe. And it was just published in January this year. They looked at 3 garments, 3 t-shirts. The first is a cream-grade cotton t-shirt. So this is a high-quality garment. The second is a B-grade poly-cotton blend t-shirt, 3070. And the third is a C-grade polyester t-shirt, the lowest grade. And when you're evaluating reuse, it's very important to establish what the replacement rate, what does is, so what is replacement rate? Well, that is how much new clothing is being replaced by the used clothing. So in this study, they worked with 3 different scenarios: a low replacement rate of 10%, a medium 40%, and a high replacement rate of 80%. What does this mean? So, for example, if you're getting such a good deal on the t-shirt that instead of buying 1 new shirt, you buy 10 shirts, that's a replacement rate of 10%, because each used shirt that you bought is only replacing 10% of the new shirt. It can also be that the used t-shirt is degraded, so you're going to use it less than you would use a new t-shirt, or some combination of the two, right? So in the low replacement scenario, that is not a very likely scenario in my opinion. The medium scenario, you can see you're getting a good deal, you're buying 2 t-shirts instead of 1, and then you're using it a little less. But many times you can even get an 80% replacement rate, right? If you're going to buy a winter jacket, just because you're getting a good deal, you're probably not buying 2. So that's about the replacement rate. And then we need to talk about recycling. So there are many different processes that are being developed, but basically they fall in 2 categories: mechanical and chemical. So the mechanical, that's when we make wipers, we make shoddy padding, insulation material, and so on. It's basically ripping the garments apart, right, and reusing them that way. And then you have the chemical, where you break down the garment into the original fibers, and then you create new material from the fibers. So some of the challenges with recycling is that when, especially with mechanical recycling, the fibers get shorter and shorter, and you are not able to use, for example, 100% recycled feedstock. You have to blend it with virgin feedstock in order for the garments not to fall apart. Another challenge is that especially the chemical recycling processes require almost pure materials, so pure cotton, pure polyester, or a pure blend. And then finally, we have the problem with persistent materials that can contaminate the fibers. Because most clothing are not just made of 1 or 2 things, right? Even if you're buying cotton jeans, they usually have some elastine in there to make them stretch a little bit. Okay, so let's look at the results of the study. So this is the climate change impact comparing for a cream grade, the high grade cotton t-shirt, what the impact is of 3 reuse scenarios compared to 3 recycling scenarios. And the 3 reuse scenarios are 10% replacement rate, 40%, and 80%. And then you have mechanical recycling and 2 types of chemical recycling. And for this t-shirt, you can see that a negative number is better. Negative means that you are reducing carbon in the atmosphere. So all the reuse scenarios outperform the recycling scenarios. Then we have the water savings impact for the same t-shirt, the high quality t-shirt. And again, you can see that all the reuse scenarios, even if you only offset 10% of a new garment, outperform the recycling. Next garment, the B-grade polycotton blend. So here we are comparing the 3 reuse scenarios to 2 chemical recycling scenarios. And in this case, it looks like the lowest replacement rate of reuse is actually worse than recycling the garment. But anything above 10% replacement rate, it is better to reuse it. Now, something about this study that I didn't personally understand why they choose to do it this way, but the evaluation of the recycling stops after the fiber has been produced. So you're not ending in the recycling scenarios with a new t-shirt. You're ending with fiber that can then be used to produce a new t-shirt. So if you really want to compare apples to apples here, I think you have to add the climate impact of manufacturing that new t-shirt. And in that case, even the lowest replacement rate of reuse is going to outperform all the recycling. And looking at the water savings impact of the B-grade polycotton blend t-shirt, then the reuse scenarios save significantly more water than the recycling does. Finally, the lowest grade polyester t-shirt, you can see that the lowest replacement rate is pretty much a tie with recycling. And anything above 10% replacement rate, reuse outperforms recycling. So the conclusion of the study is that reusing clothes is better for the environment than recycling in most scenarios. And I would even argue that it shows that it's better in all scenarios. If the garment is reusable, it is better for the environment to reuse it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the social impact of reusing clothes. So here are some of the buckets. Dressing with dignity. I mean, the opportunity to have nice clothes and to be able to express yourself. It saves money. Make sure that you have funds available for other basic necessities like shelter and food and water and health care. It creates jobs and advancement opportunities. So let's talk a little bit about job creation. Is it true that secondhand clothing creates jobs? Yeah. I mean, everyone in this room knows that that's the case. We've seen it with our own eyes. So why then is there a critique of secondhand clothes that it competes with local textile manufacturing? As I don't know if you've read Secondhand, the book that Adam Minter, or one of the books that Adam Minter wrote, but he talks about this in his book, and he points to several other factors why textile recycling, textile production declined in Africa and Latin America in the last 40 years, and reuse is not a major factor. For example, the small city where I grew up in Sweden, it was the home to the country's biggest textile plant. And then they closed it in 1970 because wages were going up in Sweden, and the very cost-sensitive textile manufacturers, they moved production to Southern Europe and to North Africa. And then a decade later, in Massachusetts, it wasn't goodwill that put the textile manufacturing industry out of business in Massachusetts in the 80s and 90s, right? It was because the industry moved to Southeast Asia. So by 2018, the global map of clothing exports looks like this, with 60% of exports coming from Asia. Then you have a little bit coming from North America, 1.5%. You have 2.3% from Africa. You have a little more from Latin America, 3.7%. And then Europe has actually maintained a pretty strong manufacturing industry of textiles. So, how many US Americans work in new clothing? Well, 1.9 million people, which only represents 1% of the labor force. But most of them are not working in production. The majority, almost 90%, work in retail. But it's kind of interesting to compare this to the study that Garson and Shaw just published today, where they looked at the jobs that are being created in Central America from used clothing. So they find that 2.1 million Central Americans are being employed in the used clothing industry. This is very significant. That's 10% of the labor force in Central America. So now we get to the part where we are going to discuss the future of our industry, the second-hand industry. And the reason for this is that there is a wave of new regulations to regulate textile reuse and recycling and keeping textiles out of the waste, which is it's a good effort. So I would like to highlight 4 examples. The first one is the extended producer responsibility law that was passed in France that took effect in 2007, and that law targets all textiles for reuse and for recycling. So it provides incentivized targets for municipalities to provide the more recycling locations, collection locations that the municipalities provide per 1,000 citizens, the higher the incentives are that they receive. And the results have been significant. So France have quadrupled collection of textiles from 2006 to 2019. And the collection is being done by and large through collection bins, 83%, followed by over-the-counter through at stores, and then a very small percentage curbside. Of course, we have some representative here from France, from Europe, who can talk more about how this regulation is actually impacting the business. The second example is the EU strategy for sustainable textiles, and it says that by 2025, all EU member states will have to provide separate collection of textiles for reuse and recycling. And the idea is to boost textile reuse and recycling in Europe. It also has the idea to develop eco-design measures for circularity. So that can mean different things, right? It could mean that you design clothes to extend the life of the clothing. I mean, I would think that would be the preferred way to eco-design anything. But it could also mean that you design garments so they are easier to take apart for recycling. So I think, very important for our industry to be engaged in these processes to influence what direction this goes. And many EU countries prohibit the export of textile waste. Again, we have people from Europe here who can speak about how this is impacting their industry. Third example is the textile waste disposal ban that was passed and took effect in November of last year in Massachusetts. This is a ban that basically just says you can't throw textiles in the trash, but there is no funding for collection or sorting or developing markets for the unwearable textiles. So no solutions. And there are no requirements for municipalities to then also provide collection of the textiles. And then last example is the extended producer responsibility law that's in the works in California. So this is a law that targets recyclable textiles only, and it is working its way through committees. So it hasn't been passed yet, and as it stands now, it would require counties to provide a collection point for every 25,000 citizens. It would create funding for collection and sorting of recyclable textiles, unwearable textiles, I should say. And it would provide funding for development of technology and markets for unwearable textiles. So this is another example, another approach. And these were just 4 examples. There are other laws in the works. Scandinavian countries are looking at passing EPR laws, and so are other countries, the Netherlands, so on. Okay, so for a conclusion, here is a list of 4 actions that I would recommend that our industry considers taking. One is that members of our industry engage in the legislative processes, make sure that our experience and expertise is heard as these laws are being developed. It is for members of our industry to inform about the benefits of secondhand. We have a good story to tell, and it is important for shaping public opinion around what should happen with textiles. And then I think it would be very good to study further the impacts in Central America and in the United States, because there are a lot of studies in Europe and in Africa, but very little. Actually, in the US, there are 3 studies, and they're all on recycling. So we lack the what you call it, the force of argument that we would get by making some actual studies. And then I think it's important to establish some kind of distribution chain accountability, because it will matter more and more for